During my mother's funeral, a tense atmosphere emerged when my mother-in-law, Eleanor, arrived with a bright smile on her face. As she casually moved through the house, she remarked that it now belonged to her son, Michael, since my parents were no longer around. Her eyes wandered through the rooms, and as she examined each one, she paused, saying, "I wonder if this room would suit me." I politely corrected her, explaining that I was the one inheriting the house. But she was unfazed, replying with a tone that bordered on smugness, "Well, since you're married to my son, doesn't everything you own technically belong to him? So, in a way, this house is my son's, right?" Her grin widened, and her lack of sensitivity during my time of mourning was stunning. She went on to suggest that we should start getting along better, subtly hinting that she might be moving in soon. My frustration quietly simmered as Eleanor appeared completely oblivious to my grief. Why is she bringing this up now? Can't she see this isn't the time? I thought to myself, my mind racing. The house was filled with cherished memories of my parents, and now it felt as if their legacy was under threat by her unreasonable claim. I took a moment to reflect on my journey, recalling that I was 44 when I married Michael. I had almost given up on the idea of marriage by the time I turned 41. But life had taken an unexpected turn when I met Michael, 5 years my junior. We connected through a mutual friend, and over time, I found that he respected my opinions and views. We even discussed where we would spend our honeymoon. Michael initially suggested Europe, but he happily agreed to my preference for the Maldives after I brought it up. Everything seemed perfect. However, things took a complicated turn when Michael mentioned his mother's desire to live with us because of his father's declining health. I understood her situation, but we had agreed before marriage that we wouldn't live together with his parents. When I reminded him of this, he promised to talk to his mother and address the situation. Despite the growing tension, I felt reassured that Michael would support me in protecting the family home, the one my parents had left to me, and that he wouldn't allow it to become just another asset for his mother to claim. Even though I was happily married, there was always a lingering pang of regret. My father had passed away 4 years before I got married, and it pained me that he never saw me walk down the aisle. He was a disciplined executive at a small business, and I admired him deeply for his dedication to providing for our family, despite the modest scale of his work. As I started my own career as an office worker, my respect for him only grew as I began to understand the challenges and pressures he had faced. 3 years into my marriage, my mother passed away. During this difficult time, Michael was incredibly supportive. "Are you okay? Maybe you should rest a bit," he'd suggest, always keeping an eye on my well-being. We held my mother's funeral at our family home, unlike the more modern funerals held in facilities. It was a personal touch that I appreciated. Throughout the service, I was grateful for Michael's presence and understanding. However, the mood shifted dramatically when Eleanor arrived. She approached me with her usual smile, expressing her condolences, which I acknowledged with a simple thank you. Our relationship had always been polite but distant, largely because we didn't see each other often. Eleanor's demeanor during the funeral seemed unusually cheerful, which made me uncomfortable. She thanked me for my efforts in organizing the funeral, pointing out how smoothly everything had gone because of my hard work. I thought that was the end of our conversation, but then she abruptly changed the subject. "Now that the funeral is over, let's drop the formalities," she said. Her sudden shift in tone caught me off guard, and I realized her earlier kindness had been nothing more than a facade. She began to comment on how beautiful the house was, despite my protests that some areas were untidy. She waved off my concerns, saying, "Don't fuss over the details." Then, in a bold move, she declared, "This house will belong to my son, and I wonder which room I should take for myself." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I tried to process what she was saying, but it was clear that her true intentions had now come to the surface. She had come to lay claim to my family's home. I reminded her, as politely as I could, that I was the one inheriting the house. She smirked and replied, "Well, I know your parents didn't have any other children, and you're married to Michael now, so doesn't that make this house his too?" Her tone was light, almost playful, but her words were filled with entitlement. I could feel my anger rising as I questioned the legitimacy of her claim. With unsettling cheerfulness, Eleanor suggested, "From now on, let's try to get along better," implying that she was planning to move in soon. Alarmed, I asked, "Does this mean we'll be living together?" She didn't hesitate for a moment. "Exactly. With such a beautiful house, it would be a shame to leave rooms empty when we could all live here comfortably. Plus, I won't have to take care of my husband all by myself." Her casual remarks, made so soon after my mother's death, felt like a dagger to the heart. Why would she even bring this up now? I was already emotionally drained, and her insensitivity only fueled my frustration. Just as I was about to respond, Michael overheard the conversation and intervened. "Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the right time for these kinds of discussions," he scolded her. But Eleanor, unfazed, simply shrugged. "Why are you making such a fuss?" she asked, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would be upset. Michael then firmly insisted that she leave, and he escorted her out. Afterward, he apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry. My mom can be unreasonable sometimes." I appreciated his support, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the issue. As we moved past the funeral and began discussing the future of our family home, I noticed a subtle but troubling shift in Michael's behavior. 12 days after the funeral, I suggested that we consider moving out of our cramped apartment. "This place is getting too small for us," I said. "Shouldn't we think about moving back to my parents' house?" Michael agreed, but there was hesitation in his voice. "Yeah, you're right. With the possibility of having kids and needing more space, it makes sense." But he trailed off. "But what?" I asked. "Well," he began cautiously, "since the house is so big, I was thinking, maybe my parents could move in with us." I was stunned. "Are you suggesting we live together with your parents?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Michael had always seemed to prioritize my opinions, but now it felt like he was agreeing with me just to avoid conflict, while secretly leaning towards his mother's wishes. His readiness to accommodate her ideas was becoming more apparent, and it was beginning to challenge my perception of him as a supportive partner. I reminded him of our agreement before marriage. "We said we wouldn't live with your parents, remember?" I said firmly. "I know, but Mom keeps insisting," he replied, his tone sounding more like a child trying to please his mother than a man making decisions with his wife. "I brought up how you stood up to her at the funeral, confronting her about her behavior. You opposed living together then, didn't you?" I asked, hoping he'd reaffirm his stance. "Yes, I was upset about her barging in like that," he conceded. "But that doesn't mean I'm completely against the idea of living together. I just didn't think it was the right time to discuss it at the funeral." His response made my heart sink. Although he had appeared to be on my side during the confrontation with Eleanor, it was becoming clear that he was starting to waver. His reluctance to take a firm stance was frustrating, and I felt increasingly isolated. "I'm firmly against living with someone who intruded into my parents' house during the funeral and presumed to claim a room," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Please make sure your mother understands this." Reluctantly, Michael replied, "Why are you so bothered by it? Fine, I'll talk to her." His lack of enthusiasm left me feeling more alone than ever. As the days passed, my perspective on living with my in-laws shifted dramatically. After witnessing Eleanor's behavior at my mother's funeral, the idea of sharing the home that my father had built, a place filled with cherished memories, became unthinkable. This was only compounded by Michael's apparent unwillingness to stand firm. When he did finally communicate my stance to Eleanor, she directly challenged me. "Why are you opposing living together in such a spacious house?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "You're Michael's wife now, and his father and I are practically your parents too. Why such strong opposition?" I reiterated my refusal, reminding her of the challenges we faced, including Michael's mobility issues and my own emotional exhaustion. But she wasn't having it. She accused me of abandoning them, despite the practical reasons I had given. Though I felt sympathy for my father-in-law, Samuel, whose health was deteriorating, the thought of being overwhelmed with responsibilities loomed large in my mind. If cohabitation were ever to be considered, it would require a significant shift in both Michael's and Eleanor's attitudes toward my needs and boundaries. A few days later, something happened that pushed me over the edge. A few days later, I came home to find Michael rearranging the living room. Curious, I asked, "What are you doing? Is this for storing moving boxes?" Michael didn't look up. "No," he replied. "I'm making space for 2 beds here." My heart sank. The mention of 2 beds filled me with dread. "Are your parents coming to stay?" I asked cautiously, afraid of the answer I already suspected. "Not just to stay," he said matter-of-factly. "They're moving in today." I was stunned. Despite my clear objections in our discussions, it seemed that Michael and Eleanor had made this decision without my consent. "Why is this happening?" I asked, my frustration and disbelief growing. Michael looked up from his task and explained, "Their lease is up, and instead of renewing it, we decided it'd be better if they moved here. It'll be cramped with 4 of us, but we're moving to your parents' house soon, right? Just bear with it for a little while." Distressed, I repeated, "That's not what I meant. Why is cohabitation even on the table? I've told you before, I don't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of my mother's funeral and had the audacity to suggest she'd be living here." My voice was firm, but my heart was pounding. Michael sighed and tried to placate me. "Look, we'll be living together from now on, so please try to get along. It's just temporary, and once we move, everything will settle down." Anger flared in my chest. "Why do you prioritize everything your mother says?" I demanded, the hurt in my voice unmistakable. He paused for a moment and then responded, "It's not about prioritizing her. I listened to both of you, and I try to make the best judgment." But it was clear that when it came to his mother, he struggled to resist her influence. He believed he was making his own decisions, but I could see how Eleanor's manipulations had taken root in his mind. Up until now, I had always seen Michael as kind and considerate, but alongside his mother, he became a different person, someone I didn't recognize. He was forcing me into a situation I had expressly rejected. And for what? To appease Eleanor? As if her happiness was the only thing that mattered. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, I tried to suppress the feelings of betrayal and isolation that had been building inside me. But it didn't take long for them to boil over. I turned to Michael and said, "I can't live like this. You're not respecting my wishes, and I feel like I'm being pushed out of my own life." He looked at me, surprised by the intensity of my words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to live with your parents, and if you can't stand by me in this, then maybe we need to reconsider our marriage," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Michael's face paled. "Reconsider our marriage? Are you serious?" "I've never been more serious," I replied. "You've chosen your mother's wishes over mine, despite everything we agreed on. This isn't the life I envisioned, and I don't think I can continue down this path." The silence between us was heavy. Michael seemed to grapple with what I was saying, unsure of how to respond. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eleanor, asking me to pick up some items from the pharmacy for her. The nerve of it, asking me to run errands for her when she was about to force her way into my life. I ignored the message and turned back to Michael. "This has to stop," I said firmly. "I've made my decision." That night, after Michael had gone to bed, I sat alone, staring at the walls of our small apartment. I knew what I had to do to protect my peace of mind, to protect my parents' legacy. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer and began the process of renouncing my inheritance. If Eleanor wanted the house so badly, she wouldn't get it from me. I'd rather let it go entirely than let her stake any claim to it. The legal process wasn't easy, but I was determined. I officially renounced my inheritance and filed the necessary paperwork with the court. The house that had been filled with the love and warmth of my parents would not be sullied by Eleanor's greed or entitlement. When I told Michael about my decision, he was speechless. "You what?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "I've renounced my inheritance," I repeated calmly. "The house is no longer mine." "Why would you do that?" he asked, incredulous. "You could have at least sold it." "I couldn't bear the thought of Eleanor living there," I replied simply. "It's better to let it go than to see her take over what my parents built." Michael's face drained of color. "But what about us?" "What about us?" I asked, my voice hardening. "You've made your choice, Michael. You chose your mother over me. This marriage, it's over." He sat down heavily, as if the weight of my words had finally hit him. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I want a divorce." He didn't respond for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "If that's what you want." I stood up, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. "It is." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I filed for divorce and moved out of the apartment, taking only a few essentials with me. That night, I stayed in a budget hotel, knowing that the life I had built with Michael was coming to an end. I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom, but there was also a twinge of sadness for the love that had once existed between us. A few days after I had left, Eleanor called me in a fury. "What's going on? The house is supposed to be yours. Why did you renounce it?" "It's none of your concern anymore," I replied calmly. "You must have forged those documents. You deceived us," she accused. "I didn't forge anything," I said, keeping my tone even. "I followed the legal process. I told you before, I didn't want you in that house, and now you won't be." Eleanor was livid. "You'll regret this. You've ruined everything." But I didn't regret it, not for a second. The house and the memories it held were safe from her. That was all that mattered to me. As the divorce proceedings continued, Michael remained distant, as if he was resigned to the fact that our marriage was over. Eleanor's influence over him had driven a wedge between us that could never be repaired. In the end, we finalized the divorce, and I walked away from the life we had shared, knowing that I had made the right decision for myself. Michael and Eleanor moved into a smaller house, a far cry from the grand home she had hoped to take over. Their new reality was a bitter one, filled with the consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, I moved into a new chapter of my life, free from the weight of their expectations and the burdens they had tried to impose on me. As I settled into my new life, I felt the warmth of my parents' memory surrounding me. Though I no longer had the house, I had preserved their legacy in my heart. It was a new beginning, one filled with peace, reflection, and a renewed sense of self. Eleanor had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I had won. I had my freedom, my dignity, and the knowledge that I had stood up for myself when it mattered most.